In a significant diplomatic effort, President Donald Trump engaged in a 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on May 19, 2025, aimed at brokering a ceasefire in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The conversation, described by both leaders as informative and constructive, comes amid escalating violence in Ukraine, including a recent drone strike that resulted in civilian casualties. As the war, which began in February 2022, continues to devastate the region, the stakes for both nations have never been higher. Hopefully it will be a productive day. A ceasefire will take place in this very violent war. A war that should have never happened will end, Trump stated on social media prior to the call. The Kremlin confirmed the dialogue, marking a renewed commitment to diplomatic discussions after a prolonged period of tension. Reports indicate that Trump also reached out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has expressed support for an unconditional ceasefire. Despite these high-level discussions, the prospect of a successful ceasefire remains uncertain. President Zelensky has been vocal about the need for an immediate halt to hostilities, followed by negotiations for a peace agreement. However, the latest developments from the negotiations in Istanbul highlight deep divisions between the two sides. Russia's demands include Ukraine's withdrawal from 4 regions that Moscow annexed in 2022, a condition that Ukraine is unlikely to accept given its current military status. The call between Trump and Putin follows a recent round of peace talks held in Turkey, which resulted in a significant prisoner swap but failed to yield any agreement on a ceasefire. During these discussions, the Russian delegation reiterated its stance that any ceasefire would require Ukraine to concede territory and agree to restrictions on its military capabilities, a demand that many in Ukraine view as unacceptable. In the aftermath of the Trump-Putin call, Russia has indicated it is prepared to work on a memorandum regarding future peace talks, a statement that has elicited skepticism from Ukraine and its allies. "The main thing for us is to eliminate the root causes of this crisis," Putin remarked, implying that Russia's objectives remain unchanged, including the incorporation of additional Ukrainian territories. European leaders who have been closely monitoring the situation expressed concern that Trump's approach may lack the pressure needed to compel Russia to compromise. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has underscored the importance of an unconditional ceasefire and warned of the potential for sanctions should Russia fail to engage sincerely in the peace process. The continued violence in Ukraine, exemplified by recent attacks that killed civilians, underscores the urgency of finding a resolution to the conflict. As the international community remains hopeful for a breakthrough, the realities on the ground suggest that both sides are entrenched in their positions. Analysts predict that while the Trump-Putin dialogue may serve to keep diplomatic channels open, substantive change may be slow to materialize. With the war entering a critical phase, the ongoing support from Western allies for Ukraine will play a pivotal role in shaping the outcomes of these discussions. In conclusion, while the recent phone call between Trump and Putin marks an important step in diplomatic efforts, the path to peace remains fraught with challenges. As both leaders navigate the complexities of their positions and the evolving battlefield dynamics, the world watches closely, hoping for a resolution that has eluded them for over 3 years. Future developments will likely hinge on the willingness of both sides to make concessions and engage in meaningful dialogue. In a significant development in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict, U.S. President Donald Trump engaged in a lengthy phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, reportedly lasting over 2 hours. This dialogue comes at a critical juncture as both nations grapple with the repercussions of the prolonged war that began in February 2022. The conversation, characterized as very informative by Putin, has sparked speculation regarding potential shifts in the diplomatic landscape. The Kremlin announced that President Putin expressed a willingness to collaborate with Ukraine towards a memorandum for future peace talks. In a statement to reporters, Putin noted, "We have agreed with the President of the United States that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace accord, defining a number of positions." This statement reflects a notable shift in rhetoric, highlighting Russia's apparent openness to dialogue after weeks of stalled negotiations. Trump echoed this sentiment in a post on Truth Social, stating the call went very well and that both countries would immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire. He emphasized that the conditions of the negotiations would be determined by both parties, indicating a potential for a more collaborative approach moving forward. However, the actual impact of this call remains to be seen, as skepticism lingers regarding Russia's commitment to peace given its recent military actions. Prior to the call, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance had acknowledged a significant impasse in the conflict, indicating a need for resolution. He suggested that Trump would question Putin's seriousness about pursuing peace. "I think the president's going to say to President Putin, 'Look, are you serious? Are you real about this?'" Vance remarked, signaling a cautious optimism about the potential for progress. However, the backdrop to this diplomatic engagement remains fraught with tension. Just days before the call, Russian forces launched their largest drone attack on Ukraine to date, targeting various regions including Kyiv. Ukrainian military intelligence has warned of more aggressive posturing from Russia, including potential missile tests intended to intimidate Ukraine and its allies. The reactions to the Trump-Putin dialogue have been mixed. Observers in Kyiv and European capitals expressed concern that Trump may not have exerted enough pressure on Putin to secure a meaningful commitment to de-escalation. Analysts have pointed out that without concrete actions or concessions from Russia, this call may merely serve to prolong the conflict rather than bring it to a resolution. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has continued to advocate for a robust negotiation strategy, announcing the formation of a permanent and expanded negotiation group to facilitate direct talks with Russia. Zelensky emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity in negotiations despite ongoing Russian threats. He reiterated Ukraine's readiness for discussions at the highest levels, although he noted that Moscow has so far rejected any proposals for direct meetings with Putin. As the situation evolves, the international community is closely monitoring the outcomes of these high-level discussions, particularly as the U.S. and its allies weigh the implications of continued military support for Ukraine against the backdrop of potential peace negotiations. The coming weeks will be pivotal as both sides navigate the complexities of diplomacy amidst ongoing hostilities. In conclusion, while the recent phone call between Trump and Putin has opened a door to potential dialogue, the path to peace remains uncertain. The effectiveness of these negotiations will depend heavily on the willingness of both parties to make concessions and prioritize diplomatic solutions over continued military engagement. As the conflict rages on, the world watches closely, hopeful for a breakthrough that may finally bring an end to the suffering in Ukraine, in a significant diplomatic effort to resolve the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump engaged in a lengthy phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on May 19, 2025. The two leaders discussed the possibility of a ceasefire, but the conversation did not yield any immediate agreement, illustrating the complexities of the situation that has persisted since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The call, which lasted over 2 hours, was described by Putin as constructive and useful. While he acknowledged Trump's diplomatic overtures, he stopped short of committing to a ceasefire that Ukraine, the U.S. and European allies have been advocating for. "We have agreed with the President of the United States that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace accord," Putin stated, emphasizing the need for effective paths toward peace. Trump, who has been actively pursuing negotiations, expressed hope for a productive day of talks. Following his discussion with Putin, he planned to reach out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other European leaders. "I want to stop the bloodbath," Trump wrote on social media, underscoring his desire to facilitate an end to hostilities. Despite the lengthy discussions, the outlook remains fraught with challenges. Vice President J.D. Vance characterized the peace talks as being at an impasse, indicating a growing frustration with the lack of progress on both sides. He remarked, "I think honestly President Putin doesn't quite know how to get out of the war," reflecting the complexities faced by leaders on both ends of the conflict. The backdrop of the call included recent direct negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Turkey, which, despite a commitment to exchange prisoners, failed to yield a ceasefire. Ukrainian officials have accused Russia of playing a word game, suggesting that Moscow's willingness to negotiate is undermined by its ongoing military actions. Over the weekend, Ukraine faced what authorities described as the largest drone attack since the war began, resulting in numerous casualties. Zelensky, who met with U.S. officials in Rome prior to Trump's call with Putin, urged a tougher stance against Russia, emphasizing the need for sustained pressure. Pressure is needed against Russia until they are eager to stop the war, he asserted. As hopes for an immediate ceasefire dim, European leaders are advocating for further sanctions against Russia to compel compliance. Analysts suggest that the Kremlin may feel emboldened by its military gains and the perception that time is on its side. Ivan Timofeyev, head of the Russian International Affairs Council, noted that while sanctions are impactful, they have not critically harmed Russia's macroeconomics, suggesting a long-term strategy may be in play. The situation remains fluid, with future developments hinging on the outcomes of Trump's upcoming discussions with Zelensky and European leaders. The international community watches closely, as any breakthrough could reshape the dynamics of the conflict. As talks progress, the challenge remains not only to negotiate a ceasefire but to establish a lasting peace, one that must reconcile the deeply entrenched positions of all parties involved. In a significant diplomatic push aimed at ending the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, former U.S. President Donald Trump engaged in a lengthy 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The discussion, described by Putin as constructive and useful, has drawn attention as it reflects Trump's continued involvement in international diplomacy during his second term. However, the key outcome, an immediate ceasefire, remains elusive, highlighting the complex dynamics at play in the war-torn region. Following their conversation, Putin acknowledged Trump's diplomatic efforts but notably did not endorse the immediate ceasefire that Ukraine, the U.S., and various European nations have been advocating. Instead, he stated that Russia is ready to work with Ukraine on a memorandum to outline potential peace terms, emphasizing the need for a most effective path toward a peaceful resolution. "We have agreed that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum on a possible future peace accord," Putin declared from Sochi. As Trump initiated this round of phone diplomacy, he also reached out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other European leaders, aiming to garner support for peace talks. In a social media post, Trump characterized the day as critical for addressing the bloodbath occurring between Russia and Ukraine, suggesting that fruitful negotiations could be on the horizon. However, Vice President J.D. Vance, who participated in discussions in Europe, noted a growing frustration with both conflict parties, remarking that peace talks appeared to be at an impasse. The call between Trump and Putin followed a recent meeting in Istanbul where Russian and Ukrainian officials agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war. However, the talks did not yield any consensus on a ceasefire, underscoring the fragility of the situation. Analysts suggest that the Kremlin's strategy is rooted in the belief that time and military leverage favor Russia, which complicates the prospects for a swift resolution to the conflict. Ivan Timofeyev, head of the Russian International Affairs Council, pointed out that sanctions have not critically harmed Russia's economy, allowing continued military operations. Concurrently, the U.S. administration faces pressure from European allies to impose further sanctions on Russia should Trump fail to secure a ceasefire. Zelensky, in meetings with U.S. officials, has pushed for robust measures against Russia, asserting that continued pressure is essential to incentivize Moscow to cease hostilities. Despite the diplomatic efforts, skepticism remains regarding Russia's genuine commitment to peace. Ukrainian officials have expressed concerns that Moscow's military activities are intensifying even as it engages in dialogue. Alexei Goncharenko, a Ukrainian MP, stated bluntly that the only obstacle to peace is Vladimir Putin, emphasizing the need for decisive action from the U.S. to influence the outcome. As the international community watches closely, the path forward remains fraught with challenges. The ongoing conflict shows no signs of abating, and the delicate balance of power will continue to shape negotiations. The stakes are high, not just for Ukraine and Russia but for global security as nations grapple with the implications of a prolonged war. Looking ahead, the coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether Trump's diplomatic overtures can lead to a tangible reduction in hostilities or if the war will continue to escalate, further complicating the geopolitical landscape.